The muffled screams echoed from inside the shipping container like ghosts trapped in steel. Brandon Ellis froze mid-step in the abandoned warehouse district, his instincts screaming danger. 3 voices, 1 woman, 2 younger, all terrified, all running out of time. He didn't hesitate. Within seconds, the former Special Ops veteran was moving toward the sound, toward a kidnapping that would shatter his quiet life forever. Welcome to a story where one mechanic's split-second decision saves 3 lives and ignites a war he never saw coming. Stick around to discover how far a single father will go when protecting a billionaire CEO and her twin daughters becomes his most dangerous mission yet. Drop a comment below telling us which state you're watching from. I love seeing how these stories reach people across the country. This is a tale of courage, sacrifice, and what happens when ordinary people refuse to look away from evil. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wrench slipped from Brandon Ellis's oil-stained hand and clattered against the concrete floor of his garage workshop. The sound echoed through Ellis Automotive like a gunshot, but it wasn't the dropped tool that made his blood run cold. It was the muffled screaming coming from somewhere in the industrial district behind his shop. Brandon stood perfectly still, every muscle in his body suddenly remembering a decade of training he'd tried to forget. The screams weren't random. They were desperate, terrified, and coming from multiple people. His mind cataloged the sounds with the precision of someone who'd spent years in hostile territory. 3 distinct voices, 1 adult female, 2 younger females, all in severe distress. He was moving before his conscious mind caught up with his instincts. His steel-toed boots carried him through the side door of his garage and into the humid Ashford evening. The industrial district was a maze of abandoned warehouses and forgotten shipping yards, the kind of place where bad things happened and nobody asked questions. "Daddy?" A small voice called from upstairs. Chloe, his 8-year-old daughter, stood at the top of the apartment stairs in her unicorn pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. It was past 9, and she should have been asleep an hour ago. "Stay inside, sweetheart," Brandon said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Lock the door behind me. I'll be right back." He didn't wait for her response. The screams were growing fainter, which meant either the victims were losing strength or someone was moving them. Neither option was acceptable. Brandon moved through the shadows with practiced silence, his breathing controlled, every footfall deliberate. The second scream came from an abandoned shipping yard, 3 blocks down Harrington Street. He could see the rusted containers stacked like children's blocks, creating a labyrinth of hiding spots and ambush points. His hand instinctively reached for a sidearm that hadn't been there for 8 years. He'd left that life behind after the last tour, after Sarah died, after he'd promised himself he'd give Chloe a normal life far from violence and chaos. But some skills never disappeared. They just waited beneath the surface. The shipping yard materialized ahead. Broken security lights created pools of darkness, perfect for concealment. Brandon's practiced eyes swept the area, noting 2 black SUVs parked near a container marked with red spray paint. Professional operation. Not street-level criminals. Then he heard it clearly. A woman's voice, muffled but defiant. "You're making a mistake. My company will find me. People are looking." A man's harsh laugh cut through the night. "Nobody knows where you are, Miss White. And by the time they figure it out, you'll have signed everything over." Brandon crept closer, using the containers as cover. Through a gap between 2 units, he could see them. 4 men in tactical gear surrounding a shipping container with its door cracked open. Inside, he caught glimpses of 3 figures. A woman in a torn business suit and 2 young girls who looked identical. Maybe 10 or 11 years old, both with the same terrified expression. One of the men was setting up what looked like recording equipment. Another held a stack of papers. This wasn't just a kidnapping. This was corporate extortion, and the victims were running out of time. Brandon counted the attackers again. 4 visible, possibly more in the vehicles. Bad odds, but he'd faced worse in places whose names he tried not to remember. The difference was that back then, he'd had a team, weapons, and air support. Now he had surprise and a decade of suppressed combat instincts screaming at him to act. He moved like smoke given purpose, circling to approach from the blind side of the container. The men were focused on their victims, confident in their isolation, their security. That confidence would be their downfall. The first man never saw Brandon coming. A precise strike to the nerve cluster behind his ear dropped him silently. Brandon caught the falling body, lowered it gently, and liberated the man's radio and zip ties. "Harris, you copy?" A voice crackled over the radio. Brandon keyed the mic, keeping his voice low and muffled. "Copy. Perimeter secure." "Good. Boss wants this wrapped up in 10. Get the woman to sign. Then we move to Location 2. Brandon's jaw tightened. Location 2 meant these people had a plan, a timeline, and probably backup. He needed to move faster. The second guard was walking a patrol pattern around the container. Brandon waited until the man turned a corner. Then, struck with the efficiency of someone who'd done this too many times to count. Another body down, another radio acquired. 2 down, 2 to go, plus however many were in the vehicles. Brandon approached the container from behind, using the stacked units as cover. He could hear one of the girls crying now, the sound tearing at something deep in his chest. Chloe was the same age. The thought of anyone terrorizing his daughter like this made his vision narrow with controlled rage. "Please," the woman was saying, her voice steady despite obvious fear. "Let my daughters go. I'll sign whatever you want. Just let Zoe and Lily leave." "Touching," one of the men sneered. "But they stay until we verify the transfers." Boss's orders. Brandon had heard enough. He grabbed a piece of loose metal piping from the ground, tested its weight, and made his move. The explosion of action lasted maybe 20 seconds. Brandon came around the container like a force of nature, the pipe connecting with the third guard's knee with a sickening crunch. The man went down screaming. The fourth guard spun, hand reaching for his weapon, but Brandon was already inside his reach. An elbow to the jaw, a strike to the solar plexus, and the guard crumpled. "Who the?" One of the men from the vehicles was running toward him, gun drawn. Brandon didn't hesitate. He threw the pipe like a javelin, catching the approaching guard in the chest. The man went down hard, the wind knocked from his lungs. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have heard the commotion and called it in. Brandon knew he had maybe 2 minutes before this got complicated. He yanked open the container door fully. 3 pairs of eyes stared at him from the darkness, the woman and 2 identical girls, all bound with zip ties, all looking at him with a mixture of hope and terror. "I'm Brandon," he said, pulling out a pocket knife to cut their restraints. "I'm here to help. We need to move, now." The woman rubbed her wrists where the ties had cut into her skin. She was striking even in her disheveled state, with sharp intelligence in her dark eyes. "You're not with them?" "Lady, I own the auto shop 3 blocks over." I heard screaming and came to help. He cut the girls free, noting how they immediately grabbed their mother's hands. "Can you walk?" "Yes." The woman pulled her daughters close. "I'm Ella White. These are my daughters, Zoe and Lily. Those men, they're trying to force me to transfer control of my company." Brandon heard engines starting. The remaining kidnappers were fleeing before the police arrived. Good. Fewer complications. Explanations later. "My shop's close. You'll be safe there until the police arrive." They moved quickly through the shipping yard. Brandon leading them through routes he'd memorized during his paranoid first year in Ashford, when he'd mapped every escape route within a mile of his daughter. The sirens were closer now, maybe a minute out. Ellis Automotive stood like a beacon of normalcy amid the industrial chaos. Brandon hustled them inside, immediately checking the locks and activating the security system he'd installed after Sarah died when the world felt too dangerous and unpredictable. Chloe appeared at the top of the stairs again, her eyes widening. "Daddy." "Who are they?" People who needed help, baby. Brandon guided Ella and the twins to the sitting area he'd set up near his office. Chloe, can you get our guests some water? His daughter nodded, disappearing into the small kitchen area with the instant acceptance that 8-year-olds possessed. Ella White sank into a chair, pulling her daughters close. Both girls were shaking, their identical faces pale with shock. "Thank you," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "If you hadn't come when you did, I don't know what would have happened." "You're safe now," Brandon assured her, though his tactical mind was already running scenarios. Professional kidnappers, corporate extortion, recording equipment. This wasn't random street crime. This was organized, well-funded, and that meant dangerous. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Brandon's instincts prickled, but he answered anyway. "Ellis. Mr. Ellis." The voice was smooth, cultured, and carried an undertone of barely controlled fury. "You've just made a very expensive mistake." Brandon's grip tightened on the phone as he moved away from Ella and her daughters, keeping his voice low. "Who is this?" "Someone who doesn't appreciate interference in business matters," the voice continued. "The woman and her daughters belong to me until certain transactions are completed. Return them, and we'll forget this unfortunate interruption." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Not happening. Brandon ended the call and immediately dialed 911, giving the dispatcher their location and a brief description of the situation. Ella White was watching him with an expression that suggested she understood exactly how serious this was. Chloe returned with 4 bottles of water, distributing them with the careful politeness Sarah had instilled in her before the cancer took her. The twin girls accepted the bottles with quiet thank yous, their hands still trembling. "The police are on their way," Brandon said, kneeling to be at eye level with the twins. "You're safe here, I promise." One of the girls, Zoe if he remembered correctly, looked at him with eyes too knowing for someone her age. "The bad men said they'd come back if Mama didn't sign the papers. Will they really come back?" Before Brandon could answer, Ella spoke up. "Mr. Ellis, there's something you need to understand. This wasn't a random kidnapping. Those men work for someone who wants to take control of my company, White Industries. We manufacture advanced pharmaceutical compounds, and someone has been trying to force a hostile takeover for months. So they kidnapped you to make you sign over control." Brandon's mind was already cataloging the implications. "How did they get to you?" Ella's face darkened with anger and self-recrimination. "They grabbed us from our home 3 hours ago. I have a security team, but someone inside must have been compromised. The house alarm never went off. The panic buttons didn't work. It was too coordinated to be anything but an inside job." The sound of approaching sirens grew louder. Within minutes, Ashford Police Department cruisers were pulling up outside Ellis Automotive, their lights painting the garage in alternating red and blue. Detective Sarah Mendoza was the first through the door, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who'd been on the force for 20 years. Brandon knew her slightly. She'd brought her car in for repairs a few months back, and they'd discovered a shared appreciation for old jazz records. "Brandon Ellis," she said, taking in the scene with professional assessment. Dispatch said something about a kidnapping. Brandon gave her the condensed version, while Ella provided details about her abduction. The twins sat close to their mother, occasionally adding details about the men, the container, the things they'd overheard. Detective Mendoza's expression grew grimmer with each detail. "Miss White, I'm familiar with your company. If what you're saying is true about corporate espionage and forced transfers, this is beyond local jurisdiction. We'll need to involve the FBI. Already calling them," one of the uniformed officers said, his phone to his ear. Brandon's secure phone, the one he'd kept from his old life and never quite managed to throw away, buzzed with a text message, unknown number, but the format identified it as coming from someone with connections to his previous unit. The message was brief. "Ellis, you've stepped into something bigger than a kidnapping. The woman is the key to a billion-dollar pharmaceutical formula. Half the criminal underworld wants her. Get her somewhere safe. Trust no one. Brandon deleted the message out of habit, but his mind was racing. If this was true, the attack tonight was just the opening move. Detective, Brandon said carefully, how secure is the Ashford police station? Mendoza looked at him sharply. Secure enough. Why? Because whoever took Miss White has resources, planning, and apparently inside information. If they could compromise her home security, what's to stop them from having people in law enforcement? The detective's jaw tightened, but she didn't dismiss the concern. You think we have a leak? I think we should consider every possibility. Ella stood, her daughters still clinging to her sides. Mr. Ellis is right. My head of security, someone I've trusted for 5 years, had to have been involved. These people have money and reach. We can't assume anywhere is truly safe. Mama, I'm scared, Lily whispered, the first words she'd spoken since they arrived at the garage. Ella pulled her closer. I know, baby, but we're safe now. Mr. Ellis saved us. Brandon's phone rang again. This time it was his old unit commander, calling from a number that shouldn't even exist anymore. Ellis, don't hang up. Colonel James Reeves said without preamble. I know you're out. I know you want to stay out. But the woman you just saved, she's connected to something that's bringing out every bad actor from here to Moscow. FBI's compromised. Local PD might be too. You need to get her and those girls somewhere secure until we can establish a clean chain of custody. Colonel, I'm not in that life anymore. I know. But right now, you're the only person in that room I'm certain isn't on someone's payroll. 24 hours. Ellis. Just keep them alive for 24 hours while we clean house on our end. The call ended before Brandon could argue further. Detective Mendoza was watching him with narrowed eyes. Who was that? Brandon made a decision that went against every protocol he'd been trained to follow. Someone who thinks your department might be compromised. Someone who thinks Miss White and her daughters aren't safe in police custody. The detective's hand moved instinctively toward her service weapon, then stopped. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious situation. Brandon looked at Ella, then at her daughters, then at Chloe, who was watching everything with wide, frightened eyes. Miss White, how much do you trust the FBI right now? Ella's expression hardened. My company has been under investigation for supposed patent violations for the past year. An investigation that coincidentally started right when someone began making acquisition offers. I trust them about as far as I can throw them. Then we have a problem, Brandon said. Because in about 5 minutes, federal agents are going to arrive and take you into protective custody, and we have no way of knowing if they're legitimate or part of whoever orchestrated your kidnapping. As if summoned by his words, black SUVs pulled up outside the garage. 4 men in FBI windbreakers emerged, their movements too synchronized, too military for standard federal agents. Detective Mendoza's hand definitely went to her weapon this time. Something's not right. FBI doesn't move this fast, and they certainly don't send tactical teams for witness protection. The lead agent, a square-jawed man with cold eyes, flashed credentials at the door. Special Agent Morrison, FBI. We're here to take Miss White and her daughters into federal custody. Brandon positioned himself between the agents and Ella's family, his body language casual but ready. Credentials, please. The real ones, not the ones you flash at local cops. Morrison's eyes hardened. Stand aside, Mr. Ellis. This is federal business. Then you won't mind Detective Mendoza verifying your credentials through official channels. Morrison's hand moved toward his jacket. It was a subtle movement, but Brandon caught it, the same tell he'd seen dozens of times in combat zones. This man wasn't reaching for identification. He was reaching for a weapon. Mendoza, get them out of here. Back door. Now. The detective didn't question him. She grabbed Ella and the girls, hustling them toward the rear exit, while Brandon faced down the 4 fake agents. That was a mistake, Mr. Ellis, Morrison said, his hand now openly holding a suppressed pistol. "We were going to let you walk away from this. Now you're a complication." Brandon smiled, the expression cold and without humor. "I've been called worse." The garage exploded into violence. Brandon moved with muscle memory that had nothing to do with conscious thought and everything to do with 10 years of training that his body refused to forget. Morrison's suppressed pistol was rising, finger tightening on the trigger, but Brandon was already in motion. He grabbed a tire iron from the nearby workbench and hurled it at the overhead fluorescent lights. Glass exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging the garage into darkness, broken only by the security lights from outside. In the chaos, Brandon dropped low and rolled behind a car lift. 3 suppressed shots punched through the space where he'd been standing, the distinctive pooft, pooft of professional killers who knew their weapons. "Spread out," Morrison barked. "Find the woman and the girls. Ellis is expendable." Brandon's jaw tightened. They just made their first critical error, dismissing him as a civilian mechanic, rather than someone who'd spent a decade hunting people far more dangerous than them. He moved through his garage like a ghost, using every shadow, every piece of equipment he'd positioned with exactly this kind of scenario in mind. 8 years of paranoid preparation were about to pay dividends. The first fake agent moved past Brandon's position, weapon sweeping for targets. Brandon struck from behind, a precise nerve strike that dropped the man instantly. He caught the falling body, lowered it silently, and claimed the man's weapon and radio. "Alpha down," he whispered into the radio, mimicking the man's voice. "Target fleeing west through back alley." "Copy," Morrison responded. "Bravo and Charlie. Intercept. Delta. Stay on Ellis." Brandon smiled in the darkness. 3 men now chasing shadows while one remained. Better odds. He moved toward the rear of the garage, where Mendoza had taken Ella and the girls. The detective had gotten them into the alley, but Brandon could hear footsteps converging from multiple directions. Morrison's team had backup waiting, more professional kidnappers masquerading as federal agents. Brandon burst through the back door to find Mendoza with her service weapon drawn, positioned between the families and 2 more armed men approaching from the north end of the alley. Ella had pulled her daughters behind a dumpster, her body shielding them. "Police, drop your weapons," Mendoza shouted, her voice carrying the authority of 2 decades on the force. The men didn't drop their weapons. They raised them. Brandon fired twice, precise shots that hit their gun hands rather than center mass. The men screamed, their weapons clattering to the ground. Mendoza spun, her own weapon now trained on Brandon for a split second before recognition kicked in. "Ellis, what the?" "Not FBI," Brandon said tersely. "Professional contractors. Probably the same team that took Miss White in the first place." More footsteps, more voices. The net was closing. "My car's 2 blocks over," Mendoza said, making an instant decision that could cost her career, but might save lives. "Unmarked sedan. We get to it, we can make it to the sheriff's station in Cooper County. Jurisdiction outside Ashford, less chance of corruption." They moved as a group, Brandon taking point while Mendoza covered their rear. Ella half carried her daughters, both girls struggling to keep up but too terrified to complain. Chloe ran beside them, her small hand gripping Brandon's jacket. "Daddy, what's happening?" "Bad people, baby. But we're going to be okay." They reached Mendoza's car, a nondescript gray sedan that looked like 1,000 others in Ashford. Everyone piled in, Brandon taking the passenger seat while Ella and the 3 young ones crammed into the back. Mendoza floored it, tires squealing as they pulled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, Brandon could see Morrison and his remaining men emerging from the alley, weapons drawn, but unable to fire in a residential area without causing a scene. "What just happened back there?" Mendoza demanded. Weaving through Ashford's late-night traffic, who were those people? "Contractors," Brandon said, checking the weapon he'd claimed. "Professional kidnappers working for someone with serious resources. Miss White You need to tell us everything. What's really going on? What's worth killing people over? Ella White took a shaky breath, her arms around her daughters. 3 months ago, my company finalized development of a revolutionary cancer treatment. Not a cure, but something that could extend life expectancy for terminal patients by years, possibly decades. It's worth billions, potentially trillions if it works as well as our trials suggest. And someone wants to steal it, Brandon said. Someone wants to force me to sell it to them below market value. I've had offers, bribes, and finally threats. When I refused everything, they escalated. Ella's voice cracked slightly. They took my daughters. They said if I didn't sign over controlling interest in White Industries, they'd hurt Zoe and Lily. I was about to sign when you showed up. Lily spoke up from the back seat, her voice small but steady. The bad man said Mama's special formula was worth more than gold. He said lots of people wanted it, and we were the key to making her give it away. Brandon's secure phone buzzed again. Another text from his old unit. Ellis, the woman is connected to Crimson Pharmaceutical, a black market syndicate trying to monopolize next-gen medical treatments. They've killed before. They'll kill again. The girls are leverage, and you're now on their list. Recommend immediate extraction to secure federal facility. He showed the message to Ella, whose face went pale. Crimson Pharmaceutical. I've heard rumors about them. They supposedly control about 40% of the illegal pharmaceutical market worldwide. If they're behind this, then the people who took you tonight were just the first team. Brandon finished. They'll send more, better equipped, better trained, and now they know you have help. Mendoza's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. This is beyond anything Ashford PD can handle. We need real federal protection, not the fake kind. Colonel Reeves can arrange that, Brandon said, pulling up his secure contacts. But it'll take time, maybe 24 hours to establish a clean chain of custody and verify that everyone involved is legitimate. 24 hours, Ella repeated, looking at her terrified daughters. Can you keep us alive that long? Brandon thought about Chloe, sitting in the back seat next to these 2 girls she'd just met. All 3 of them too young to understand the full scope of the danger they were in. He thought about Sarah, his late wife, who'd made him promise to always do the right thing even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Yes, he said simply. I have a place, off the grid, defensible, stocked for emergencies. We hole up there while Colonel Reeves cleans house on his end. You've been preparing for something like this? Mendoza asked, shooting him a sharp look. I've been preparing for the world to end, Detective. This is actually less complicated than most of my scenarios. They drove in silence for several minutes before Zoe spoke up. Mr. Ellis, why are you helping us? You don't even know us. Brandon turned to look at the girl, seeing the intelligence and fear warring in her expression. Because when I heard you screaming, I could not help. It's that simple. He's a good man, Chloe said with absolute certainty. My daddy saves people. It's what he does. Ella met Brandon's eyes in the rearview mirror, and something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition of the commitment he just made. Thank you, she said quietly. For everything. Brandon's secure phone rang. Colonel Reeves again. Ellis, status report. We're mobile, heading to my safe location. Fake FBI tried to grab them. How compromised are we talking? Crimson has assets embedded in law enforcement, federal agencies, possibly even our own people. Trust only verified contacts. I'm sending you coordinates for a pickup location tomorrow at 1,800 hours. Can you keep them alive until then? Brandon looked at the 3 young ones in the back seat, at Mendoza's determined expression, at Ella White's mixture of fear and fierce protectiveness for her daughters. 24 hours. We'll be there. Good. And Ellis, the formula Miss White developed, isn't just valuable to criminals. Foreign governments want it too. You're not just protecting a family. You're protecting something that could shift global power dynamics. The call ended, leaving Brandon with the weight of that information. "Where exactly is this safe location?" Mendoza asked. 40 miles north, property I bought 3 years ago under a false name. Single access road, natural defenses, and enough supplies to hold out for a week if necessary." "You really are paranoid," Mendoza observed. "Prepared," Brandon corrected. "There's a difference." As they left Ashford's city limits behind, heading into the rural darkness of northern counties, Brandon allowed himself a moment to consider what he'd just committed to. 24 hours protecting a billionaire CEO, her twin daughters, a detective who'd just thrown her career away to help them, and his own daughter caught in the crossfire. Somewhere behind them, Morrison and his team were regrouping, calling for backup, planning their next move. Somewhere ahead, Crimson Pharmaceutical was mobilizing resources to reclaim their prize. And somewhere in the middle, Brandon Ellis, mechanic and former special operations soldier, was about to discover that leaving the war behind was never as simple as changing your address and hanging up your uniform. The war, it seemed, had found him anyway. And this time, the stakes weren't abstract mission objectives or geopolitical considerations. This time, the stakes had names and faces and frightened eyes that looked to him for salvation. He checked his weapon, counted his ammunition, and began planning defensive strategies for the next 24 hours. It was going to be a long night. The safe house materialized from the darkness like something out of a survivalist's fever dream. Brandon had purchased the 40-acre property under an alias 3 years ago, building it piece by piece during weekends when Chloe stayed with Sarah's parents. The main structure was a reinforced cabin, with steel core walls disguised behind rustic wood paneling, bulletproof windows that looked like ordinary glass, and a basement converted into something that would make most preppers jealous. "This is your safe house?" Mendoza asked as they pulled up the gravel driveway. "It looks like a vacation rental." "That's the point," Brandon said, already scanning the perimeter through night vision binoculars he'd retrieved from a hidden compartment. Defensive positions disguised as landscaping, motion sensors hidden in the trees, exit routes that look like hiking trails. He helped everyone inside, noting how Ella immediately positioned herself between her daughters and the windows. Protective instinct. Good. They'd need that in the hours ahead. Chloe was already showing Zoe and Lily where the bathroom was, her natural friendliness overcoming the terror of the past hour. The 3 girls disappeared upstairs while Brandon activated the security system. "Perimeter's clean," he announced after checking the monitors. "But it won't stay that way long." "Mendoza, you know how to handle a rifle?" The detective nodded. "Qualified expert, 4 years running." Brandon opened a concealed panel in the wall, revealing an arsenal that made Mendoza's eyebrows rise. "You're more than just paranoid, Ellis. I prefer thoroughly prepared." He handed her a tactical rifle with night scope. "Ella, can you shoot?" "I took lessons after the threat started," Ella admitted. "I'm not great, but I can point and pull the trigger." "Good enough." Brandon distributed weapons, checking each person's comfort level, even handed Ella a compact pistol with simple instructions. "Point at center mass, squeeze, don't pull. Keep squeezing until the threat stops." The first attack came 90 minutes later. Brandon was on the second-floor observation post when motion sensors triggered along the northern perimeter. 6 heat signatures moving through the trees with tactical spacing. Professional operators. Not the fake FBI team from earlier. "Contact," Brandon said into the radio system he'd installed throughout the house. 6 hostiles, northern approach. "Mendoza, take the east window. Ella, get the girls to the basement safe room." He heard Ella hustling the young ones downstairs, their footsteps quick but controlled. Good. They'd practiced the drill twice since arriving. Through his scope, Brandon watched the team advance. They moved well, using cover effectively, maintaining communication discipline. These weren't ordinary contractors. These were Tier 2 operators, possibly former military. "Mendoza, you seeing this?" "Yeah, these guys know what they're doing." Brandon keyed his throat mic. "Then we give them a surprise they're not expecting." He'd spent months rigging the property with non-lethal deterrents. Pressure plates that triggered flashbangs, motion-activated sprinklers filled with pepper spray solution, concealed speakers that could broadcast disorienting frequencies. The lead operator triggered the first trap. A flashbang detonated 3 feet to his left, the concussive blast sending him stumbling. His teammates scattered, seeking cover, their disciplined formation breaking. Brandon used the chaos to relocate, moving through the house's hidden passages to a ground-floor firing position. He put 3 rounds into the nearest tree trunk, inches from an operator's head. Warning shots. He didn't want to kill anyone if he could avoid it. "This is private property," Brandon's voice boomed through the external speakers. "Leave now, or the next shots won't miss. We just want the woman and her kids," a voice called back. "Nobody else needs to get hurt." "Not happening." The response was a burst of automatic fire that shattered 2 windows. Brandon had already moved, anticipating the attack. He triggered the pepper spray system, watching through monitors as 3 operators stumbled out of the chemical cloud, eyes streaming. Mendoza fired from her position, controlled 3 round bursts that kicked up dirt near the remaining operators. "They're flanking east." Brandon was already moving. He emerged from a concealed exit, coming up behind the flanking team. 2 precise strikes with a tactical baton dropped both men before they realized he was there. 4 down, 2 retreating, Brandon reported, watching the remaining operators drag their incapacitated teammates back toward the tree line. "They'll regroup and call for backup." Mendoza joined him at the window. "How long until they come back?" "Hour. Maybe 2. Next time they'll bring more people and heavier weapons." Brandon checked his watch. 16 hours until the extraction point. "We need to be ready." In the basement, Ella held her daughters close, both girls trembling, but trying to be brave. Chloe sat with them, somehow managing to tell a story about a princess and a dragon that made the twins smile despite everything. Brandon watched his daughter comfort these frightened girls and felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just about protecting innocent people anymore. This was about protecting his daughter's newfound friends, about giving Chloe the kind of world where kindness mattered more than violence. "They're coming back, aren't they?" Ella asked quietly. "Yes, but we'll be ready." The second wave hit at dawn, and this time they weren't taking chances. Brandon counted 12 operators, 3 approaching from each cardinal direction, and they'd brought serious hardware. "We can't hold here," Mendoza said, watching the thermal scans. "Not against that many with those weapons." Brandon was already implementing Contingency Plan Delta. "There's a fallback position. Old hunting cabin 2 miles east. Less defensible, but harder to find. We move now while they're still setting up." They evacuated through the underground tunnel Brandon had dug over the course of 6 months, emerging in a concealed exit half a mile from the main house. The tunnel had seemed excessive when he'd built it. Now it was saving their lives. The forest was thick with morning mist, providing natural concealment as they moved single file through terrain Brandon had memorized during countless solo hikes. Chloe stayed close to the twins, whispering encouragement when they stumbled over roots. "You're really good at this," Zoe said to Chloe during a brief rest stop. "Being brave, I mean. My daddy taught me," Chloe replied. "He says being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared." Brandon overheard the exchange and felt that familiar tightness in his throat. Sarah would have been proud of their daughter. The hunting cabin was exactly as he'd left it 6 months ago during his last supply run. Small, weathered, and completely off any official maps. He'd stocked it with enough food, water, and ammunition to last a week. "It's not much," Brandon admitted as they filed inside, "but it's invisible from satellite imagery and accessible only by foot." Ella looked around the sparse interior and smiled. "Mr. Ellis, after the night we've had, this looks like a 5-star hotel." While Mendoza set up a watch rotation, Brandon prepared a meal from the stored supplies. Nothing fancy, just MREs heated over a camping stove. But the girls ate like they hadn't seen food in days. "Tell us about yourself, Mr. Ellis." Lily said suddenly. Chloe said you used to be a soldier. Brandon glanced at his daughter, who shrugged apologetically. I was. Long time ago. Different life. Did you save people then too? Zoe asked. Sometimes. Other times I did. Things I'm not proud of. War's complicated. Ella spoke up. Why did you stop? Brandon was quiet for a moment, deciding how much to share. My wife, Sarah, got sick. Cancer. She needed me home, not deployed overseas. So I got out, moved to Ashford, opened the garage, tried to give Chloe a normal life. I'm sorry about your wife, Ella said softly. Me too. But she gave me Chloe, and she taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose to be present for the people you love. The conversation drifted to lighter topics. Ella talked about her company, about the years of research that led to the cancer treatment breakthrough. The twins shared stories about their school, their friends, the normal life that had been shattered when men with guns invaded their home. What happens after tomorrow? Lily asked. When the Colonel's people come to get us. You'll be safe, Brandon promised. Real federal protection, not the fake kind. Your mom's formula will be secured, and the people who took you will face justice. But what about you and Chloe? Zoe pressed. Will we see you again? Brandon looked at Ella, seeing the same question in her eyes. I don't know. That depends on a lot of things. I hope we do, Chloe said simply. Zoe and Lily are nice. I like having sisters. The word hung in the air, heavy with implications and possibilities. As night fell, they took turns keeping watch while others slept. Brandon found himself on the porch with Ella during the midnight rotation, both of them nursing cups of instant coffee and watching the forest for threats. You didn't have to do this, Ella said quietly. You could have called the police and walked away. I have a daughter. If someone took her, I'd want someone to help. It's that simple. It's not simple at all. Ella turned to face him. You've risked everything, your safety, your daughter's safety, for people you don't even know. I know you now. I know Zoe and Lily. That makes you worth protecting. Ella was quiet. For a long moment. When this is over, when we're safe, I'd like to repay you somehow. You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything. You gave me back my daughters, my life, my future. She paused. Maybe you gave us all a future. Before Brandon could respond, his radio crackled. Mendoza's urgent voice. Movement, southeast perimeter. Multiple contacts. They'd been found. The attack came with the pre-dawn darkness, when human alertness was at its lowest and mistakes were most common. Brandon had anticipated this timing, had planned for it, but the sheer number of operators surrounding the cabin still made his tactical mind race through increasingly desperate scenarios. 20 contacts. Mendoza reported from her observation post in the cabin's small attic. Full tactical gear. Suppressed weapons. Night vision. These aren't contractors anymore. These are professional soldiers. Brandon checked his ammunition count. Not enough for a prolonged engagement. He keyed his radio to Colonel Reeves on the emergency frequency. We're under siege. 20+ hostiles. Request immediate extraction. Static, then Reeves' voice. QRF is wheels up. ETA 40 minutes. Can you hold? 40 minutes against 20 trained operators with limited ammunition and 3 young girls to protect. The math was impossible. We'll hold, Brandon lied. He turned to find Ella loading magazines with the calm efficiency of someone who'd made peace with the possibility of death. Teaching moment, she said with dark humor. Never let them see you panic. The first assault came from the north. Suppressing fire shattered windows while a 4-man team attempted to breach the door. Brandon triggered the propane tank he'd rigged with a remote detonator. The explosion wasn't lethal, but it sent the breach team stumbling backward, their night vision overloaded by the sudden flash. Basement, now, Brandon ordered. The girls and Ella retreated while Mendoza laid Coleman down covering fire. The cabin had been built for hunting weekends, not warfare. Its defenses were improvised at best, but Brandon had learned in a dozen combat zones that preparation and creativity beat superior numbers more often than military textbooks admitted. He ignited the perimeter he'd soaked with flammable liquid hours earlier, creating a wall of flame that forced the attackers to regroup. Precious minutes gained. From the basement, he heard Chloe singing softly to the twins. Some silly song about butterflies that Sarah used to sing. The sound of innocence persisting in the middle of violence made Brandon's resolve harden into something unbreakable. "East wall," Mendoza called. "They're bringing up some kind of breaching charge." Brandon grabbed the hunting rifle, aimed for the device, and squeezed the trigger. The charge detonated prematurely, taking out 2 operators and forcing another retreat. But they were learning his tactics, adapting, probing for weaknesses. The next assault would be coordinated, overwhelming. He checked his watch. 35 minutes, until the QRF arrived. An eternity in combat time. The radio crackled with an unfamiliar voice. "Mr. Ellis, this is pointless. Give us the woman and her daughters, and you and your people walk away." Brandon keyed the mic. "Come take them." What followed was the longest 30 minutes of Brandon's life. He moved through the cabin like a ghost, firing from one position then relocating before return fire could find him. Mendoza matched his pace, her police training insufficient for this level of combat but her courage more than compensating. They burned through ammunition, improvised weapons from furniture and tools, and held the line through sheer stubborn refusal to fail. When the helicopter's rotors finally cut through the chaos, Brandon had never heard a more beautiful sound. The QRF fast roped down, 20 Rangers who turned the siege into a rout within minutes. In the sudden silence that followed, Brandon found himself in the basement, surrounded by 4 terrified faces looking to him for assurance that it was finally over. "We're safe," he said simply. "It's done." Chloe launched herself into his arms, and a moment later, the twins joined in. Ella stood back, tears streaming down her face, mouthing a silent thank you. Colonel Reeves appeared in the doorway, older but still carrying the presence that had commanded respect across 3 continents. "Ellis, still can't stay out of trouble, can you?" "Apparently not, sir. That woman and her kids, they're priority 1 now. Full federal protection, clean team verified personally. We'll get them somewhere secure." Brandon looked at Ella, at the twins who'd somehow become important to him in less than 24 hours. "And then what?" "Then they disappear into protection, and you go back to fixing cars." Reeves paused. "Unless you want back in." "No," Brandon said firmly. "My war's over." But looking at Chloe holding hands with Zoe and Lily, he wondered if that was entirely true. 3 weeks had passed since the siege at the hunting cabin. 3 weeks of federal debriefings, witness statements, and the careful dismantling of Crimson Pharmaceuticals operations across 4 continents. Brandon had testified before a grand jury, watched as corrupt agents were arrested, and seen Morrison and his team face federal charges that would keep them imprisoned for decades. The safe house, where they'd placed Ella and the twins, was a converted estate in rural Connecticut, complete with armed guards, biometric security, and enough surveillance equipment to monitor a small city. It should have been the end of the story. Should have been the point where Brandon returned to Ashford and his quiet life of fixing transmissions and raising his daughter in peace. Instead, he found himself driving to Connecticut every weekend with Chloe, who'd insisted she needed to see her sisters, despite the 4-hour drive each way. Ella had welcomed the visits, and slowly, cautiously, something had begun to develop between Brandon and the brilliant CEO who'd survived an ordeal that would have broken most people. "Daddy, do you like Miss Ella?" Chloe asked during one of their drives, her 8-year-old directness catching Brandon off guard. "She's a good person," Brandon said carefully. "She's been through a lot." "That's not what I asked." Chloe looked at him with Sarah's knowing eyes. "Do you like her the way you liked Mommy?" Brandon gripped the steering wheel, choosing his words carefully. Your mother was special, Chloe. Nobody could ever replace her. I know that. But Mommy wouldn't want you to be alone forever. She told me before she got really sick. She said you have too much love in your heart to keep it locked away. The conversation died as they pulled up to the safe house, but Brandon couldn't stop thinking about it, about Ella's quick smile when he arrived, about how naturally their conversations flowed, about the way she looked at him like he was something more than just the man who'd saved her life. The visit started normally enough. The girls disappeared to play in the estate's converted game room, while Ella and Brandon sat in the garden, discussing everything from philosophy to the best way to make pasta sauce. It was comfortable, easy, the kind of connection Brandon hadn't felt since Sarah's death. Then Agent Marcus Hawthorne arrived, unannounced and unwelcome. Hawthorne was FBI, one of the clean agents Reeves had vetted personally, but his presence triggered every tactical instinct Brandon possessed. Federal agents didn't make social calls to safe houses. Miss White, Hawthorne said, his expression grave. We have a problem. Ella's face went pale. What kind of problem? The Congressional Committee investigating Crimson Pharmaceutical wants to subpoena your research. They claim that your cancer treatment represents a national security interest and should be subject to federal oversight. That's insane, Ella said, standing abruptly. My research is private. My company developed it with private funding. I understand, but Senator Patricia Westbrook is chairing the committee, and she has ties to several pharmaceutical companies that would benefit from either acquiring or suppressing your treatment. Brandon felt rage building in his chest. So, this is what? Legal extortion? They couldn't kidnap her, so now they're using Congress? Hawthorne's expression suggested he agreed but couldn't say so officially. Miss White, you're being summoned to testify in 5 days. If you refuse, they'll hold you in contempt. If you comply, they'll pick apart every aspect of your research looking for violations, real or manufactured. Can they actually seize my work? Ella's voice was steady, but Brandon saw her hands trembling. With the right legal justification, yes. National security provisions give them broad authority. After Hawthorne left, Ella stood at the window overlooking the estate's grounds, watching her daughters play. Brandon moved beside her, close but not touching, offering silent support. I survived kidnapping and assassination attempts, Ella said quietly. I thought that was the worst they could do. But this? Using the law as a weapon? How do you fight that? You fight it by being smarter than them, Brandon said. By going public before they can control the narrative. Ella turned to look at him. What do you mean? They want your research secret so they can either steal it or bury it. What if you published everything? Made it open source? Suddenly, there's no secret to steal, no monopoly to maintain. I'd lose billions. My company's entire value is based on that patent. Money or lives, Ella, which matters more? She was quiet for a long moment, then something like determination hardened her features. You're right. I'll hold a press conference. Tomorrow, I'll announce that I'm releasing the research publicly and donating the manufacturing rights to a non-profit foundation. Westbrook will come after you hard. Let her try. I have the truth, and after everything I've survived, a senator doesn't scare me. The press conference the next day was held at a Boston hotel, carefully coordinated by Hawthorne and his clean team. Ella stood before dozens of cameras and reporters, looking every bit the billionaire CEO, despite the ordeal she'd endured. 3 weeks ago, my daughters and I were kidnapped by criminals who wanted to steal my company's research, she began, her voice clear and unwavering. Men with guns invaded our home, terrorized my family, and tried to force me to sign over work that could save millions of lives. They failed, thanks to the courage of a man named Brandon Ellis, who heard us screaming and refused to look away. Brandon stood in the back of the room, uncomfortable with the attention, but unable to deny the pride he felt watching Ella take control of her narrative. Today, I'm announcing that White Industries will be releasing our cancer treatment research into the public domain. No patents, no exclusivity, no corporate monopolies. Any qualified laboratory anywhere in the world can now manufacture this treatment. Because saving lives is more important than protecting profits. The room erupted with questions, but Ella held up her hand. I'm also announcing that I will not be complying with Senator Westbrook's subpoena. My research is now public. There's nothing left to seize, nothing left to suppress. And I challenge the senator to explain to the American people why she's more interested in protecting pharmaceutical company profits than in saving lives. It was a declaration of war, delivered with the precision of a surgical strike. Senator Westbrook's response came within hours. A televised statement claiming Ella was reckless, that open sourcing advanced medical research posed security risks, that congressional oversight was necessary to protect public health, but the public wasn't buying it. Social media exploded with support for Ella. Medical organizations praised her decision. Overnight, she became a symbol of corporate responsibility versus government corruption. Brandon watched it all unfold from the safe house, where security had been doubled despite the reduced threat. Chloe sat with the twins, all three girls glued to a tablet watching news coverage that mentioned their families. "Is my mom a hero now?" Zoe asked. "Your mom's always been a hero," Brandon said. "Now everyone else just knows it too." That evening, after the girls were asleep, Brandon found Ella on the terrace, staring at the stars. She looked exhausted but victorious, like a general after a hard-won battle. "Thank you," she said as he approached, "for everything, for saving us, protecting us, and giving me the courage to fight back the right way. You gave yourself that courage. I just reminded you it was there." Ella turned to face him, and in the moonlight, Brandon saw something in her expression that made his heart race. "Brandon, these past 3 weeks, getting to know you, watching how you are with Chloe and my girls, I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "About what happens next. When this is all over, and the threats are gone, and life returns to normal." She paused, gathering courage. "I don't want to go back to the way things were. Before, I mean. I want something different, something better." Brandon understood what she wasn't quite saying. He felt it too, this connection that had formed in crisis and deepened in its aftermath. "Ella, I have an 8-year-old daughter and an auto repair shop in a small town. You're a billionaire CEO with a company to run and a public profile. Our worlds don't exactly align. Maybe they don't have to align," Ella said softly. "Maybe they just need to intersect." "Brandon, my daughters ask about you and Chloe every day. They want to know when you're visiting again, when they can come to Ashford, when we can all be together. And I realize I'm asking the same questions." Before Brandon could respond, his secure phone buzzed. "Colonel Reeves, his timing is impeccable as ever. Ellis, we have a situation. Crimson Pharmaceutical isn't done. They've got one more play, and it's happening tomorrow." Brandon felt the familiar cold settle into his bones. What kind of play? The kind where they try to prove that Ella's treatment is dangerous by sabotaging the first public trial. "We've got intelligence suggesting they're going to poison test subjects and blame the treatment. Discredit her work, destroy her credibility, make her release into the public domain look like a catastrophic mistake." "Where and when?" "Memorial Hospital, Boston. Clinical trial starts at 0900 hours. 40 terminal patients. Last hope for most of them. If Crimson succeeds, those people die, and Ella's reputation dies with them." Brandon looked at Ella, who'd heard enough of the conversation to understand. Her face had gone pale, but determined. "We stop them," she said simply. "Whatever it takes." "Miss White, this is federal jurisdiction now," Reeves said through the phone. "You need to stand down and let us handle it." "With all due respect, Colonel, this is my research and my responsibility. Those patients are trusting my treatment with their lives. I won't let criminals use them as pawns." Brandon heard something like admiration in Reeves' voice when he responded. Then I guess you'll need security. Ellis, you up for one more mission? Brandon looked at Ella, at the fire in her eyes, at the determination that had carried her through kidnapping and siege and congressional attacks. He thought about Chloe and the twins sleeping upstairs, about the future they all deserved. One more mission, he agreed. Then I'm really done. But even as he said it, Brandon knew it wasn't quite true, because protecting Ella and her daughters had stopped being a mission somewhere along the way. It had become something more personal, more permanent. It had become family. The drive to Boston Memorial Hospital took 3 hours, but Brandon used every minute to plan. Hawthorne had provided blueprints of the facility, security protocols, and a list of personnel involved in the clinical trial. Somewhere in that data was a vulnerability that Crimson Pharmaceutical planned to exploit. Ella sat beside him in the passenger seat, reviewing her own research notes, cross-referencing drug interactions, and potential sabotage points. She'd transformed from terrified kidnapping victim to determined protector of her work, and Brandon found himself admiring her resilience more with each passing day. They'll target the IV drips, Ella said, her analytical mind working through possibilities. It's the easiest point of contamination. Add something that mimics treatment failure or causes adverse reactions, and suddenly, my therapy looks dangerous. Can you test for contamination? If I know what I'm looking for, but there are hundreds of compounds that could cause problems. She rubbed her temples, stress evident in every line of her body. Brandon, 40 people are trusting their lives to my treatment tomorrow. If Crimson succeeds, if people die because I wasn't careful enough, smart enough, fast enough. Stop, Brandon said gently. You can't control what criminals do. You can only control how you respond. And you're responding by fighting to protect those patients. That's what matters. Ella was quiet for a moment. How do you do that? Stay so calm when everything's falling apart? Years of practice in places where panic got people killed. You learn to compartmentalize, to focus on the mission, and deal with the emotions later. And later, what happens to all those emotions you've compartmentalized? Brandon thought about the nightmares that still woke him sometimes, about the ghosts of soldiers he couldn't save, about Sarah's final days when all his training was useless against cancer. Sometimes they catch up with you. Sometimes you find ways to process them. And sometimes you find people who help carry the weight. Ella reached across the console and took his hand. The gesture was simple but meaningful, a connection that said more than words could express. They arrived at the hospital well before dawn, entering through a service entrance Hawthorne had secured. The clinical trial was being conducted in a specialized wing, with patients already admitted and prepared for the first treatment administration. Brandon met with Hawthorne and his team in a converted conference room. 6 agents, all vetted personally by Reeves, all carrying the grim determination of people who'd seen corruption from the inside and were committed to stopping it. We've placed undercover personnel among the medical staff, Hawthorne explained, pointing to surveillance feeds showing the treatment wing. But Miss White, you're the only one who can identify sabotage quickly enough to prevent harm. I'll need access to the pharmacy, the 4 preparation area, and the treatment rooms, Ella said, and I'll need to test every single bag before it's administered. That's 40 patients, multiple bags each. We're talking hundreds of individual tests. Then we better get started. What followed was the most intensive morning of Brandon's life. And he'd lived through more than his share of intense mornings. Ella moved through the hospital like a woman possessed, testing every medication bag, every saline solution, every piece of equipment that would come in contact with her patients. Brandon shadowed her, watching for threats while she worked. Twice, they found contamination, subtle chemical additions that would have caused organ failure, had been blamed on the treatment. Each time, Ella identified the tampering, isolated the compromised materials, and requisitioned clean replacements. How are they getting to the supplies? Brandon asked after the second discovery. Inside help, Hawthorne said grimly. We're reviewing security footage now. But whoever's doing this knows how to avoid cameras. At 0800 hours, an hour before treatment was scheduled to begin, Brandon noticed something odd. A janitor was working in the pharmacy area, but his movements were wrong. Too purposeful, too focused on specific storage units. Brandon keyed his radio. Hawthorne, janitor in pharmacy sector. Can you verify credentials? A pause, then Hawthorne's urgent voice. Negative on verification. That's not hospital staff. All teams converge on pharmacy. The fake janitor spotted the agents moving toward him and bolted, but Brandon was already in position. He intercepted the man at the service stairs, and they went down hard, struggling for control. The man was trained, former military by his fighting style. But Brandon had the advantage of rage fueling his movements. This person had been planning to poison terminal patients, to murder people whose only crime was hoping for a cure. Brandon ended the fight with a chokehold that left the man unconscious but alive. Hawthorne's team secured him, finding a syringe filled with what laboratory analysis would later identify as a toxin designed to cause cardiac arrest. That's their agent, Hawthorne confirmed. But he wasn't working alone. We need to sweep the entire wing. The sweep took 30 minutes, precious time ticking away before patients would arrive for treatment. They found 2 more saboteurs, both disguised as medical personnel, both carrying materials meant to contaminate the clinical trial. At 0900 hours, when the first patients arrived, Ella stood in the treatment room with tears in her eyes but determination in her voice. "We're ready," she announced. "The trial can proceed safely." Brandon watched from the observation area as the first patient received treatment. A grandmother named Patricia, who'd been battling stage 4 pancreatic cancer for 2 years. She smiled at Ella with the kind of hope that came from having nothing left to lose. "Thank you for giving me a chance," Patricia said. "Thank you for trusting me," Ella replied. The treatment proceeded without incident. All 40 patients received their doses, monitored continuously by medical staff and Ella's watchful eye. By evening, early results were showing promise. Blood markers improving, tumor growth slowing. Ella found Brandon in the observation room, exhaustion and relief warring on her features. "We did it. They're safe. The treatment is working." "You did it," Brandon corrected. "You protected your patients and your research." Ella moved closer, and Brandon found himself unable to look away from her eyes. "We did it together, like we've done everything else these past weeks." "Brandon, I need to tell you something." Before she could continue, a small voice interrupted. "Daddy?" Brandon turned to find Chloe standing in the doorway with Zoe and Lily. Hawthorne had brought them from the safe house, knowing the girls would want to be there for this moment. "Miss Ella saved people today," Chloe announced, running to hug Ella. "Agent Hawthorne told us. She's a real hero." "Your daddy's the hero," Ella said, returning the hug. "He stopped the bad men from hurting my patients." "You're both heroes," Zoe declared with the absolute certainty only young people could muster. "And we think you should get married." The statement hung in the air while both adults tried to process what had just been said. Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Then we could be real sisters with Chloe. Not just friends, but actual family." Brandon looked at Ella, seeing his own surprise mirrored in her expression. "Girls, that's not how it works. Adults don't just get married because their daughters want them to," Ella finished, a smile playing at her lips. "No, but maybe adults get married because they've found something rare and precious in each other, because they've been through fire together and come out stronger, because they look at their future and can't imagine it without the other person." Brandon's heart was racing. "Ella, are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm falling in love with you, Brandon Ellis. I'm saying that when I think about where I want to be a year from now, 5 years from now, it's wherever you and Chloe are. I'm saying that my daughters have already decided you're their family, and I think I have too." The 3 girls were watching with barely contained excitement, waiting for Brandon's response. He thought about Sarah, about the promise he'd made to keep loving and living even after she was gone. He thought about the weeks with Ella, the easy conversations and shared danger and growing connection. He thought about Chloe's happiness when she was with the twins, about the family they'd accidentally created through crisis and choice. "I love you too," Brandon said, the words feeling both terrifying and absolutely right. "I didn't plan this, didn't expect it. But somewhere between rescuing you and protecting you and getting to know you, I fell completely in love with you." Ella closed the distance between them, and when they kissed, 3 young girls erupted in cheers that echoed through the hospital wing. "Does this mean we're sisters now?" Zoe asked hopefully. "It means," Brandon said, kneeling to include all 3 girls in the conversation, "that we're a family. Maybe not traditional, maybe a little complicated, but ours." Chloe threw her arms around him. "Mommy would be happy, Daddy. She'd like Miss Ella, and she'd love having more granddaughters." The simple truth of his daughter's words made Brandon's eyes sting with tears. Sarah would have loved this, would have welcomed Ella and the twins into their family with open arms. Maybe she was welcoming them now, wherever she was, happy that Brandon had found a way to love again. Hawthorne appeared in the doorway, tactfully waiting for the family moment to conclude. "Ellis, Reeves wants to talk to you. Says it's important." Brandon took the call in the hallway, Ella beside him, their hands intertwined. "The saboteurs are talking," Reeves said. "We've got evidence tying them directly to Crimson Pharmaceuticals' executive board. With Miss White's testimony and today's attempted poisoning, we can bring down the entire organization." "How long?" "Full prosecution? 6 months to a year. But Ellis, they're offering you something else too. The Protective Services Division is being reformed. Clean personnel only. Focused on protecting people like Miss White who become targets because they're trying to do good in the world. They want you to lead it." Brandon looked at Ella, at the hope and understanding in her eyes. "I appreciate the offer, Colonel, but I'm done with that life. I've got a family to think about now." "Actually," Ella said, "maybe you should hear them out." The federal courthouse in Manhattan was packed with journalists, legal observers, and representatives from pharmaceutical companies around the world. The trial of Crimson Pharmaceuticals' executive board had become a referendum on corporate corruption, medical ethics, and the price of human life measured in profit margins. Brandon sat in the gallery beside Ella, watching as prosecutors presented evidence that would dismantle one of the largest criminal enterprises in the medical industry. The saboteurs captured at Memorial Hospital had provided testimony in exchange for reduced sentences, detailing years of intimidation, theft, and murder orchestrated by Crimson's leadership. Senator Westbrook had resigned in disgrace 2 weeks earlier when her financial ties to Crimson became public knowledge. The congressional investigation had been suspended indefinitely. Ella's open-source cancer treatment was now being manufactured by laboratories in 17 countries, with early results showing remarkable success rates. The jury will now deliberate, the judge announced after 3 weeks of testimony. They returned in 4 hours with guilty verdicts on all counts. The courtroom erupted in applause, quickly silenced by the judge's gavel, but the emotion was unmistakable. Justice, imperfect and delayed, had finally arrived. Outside the courthouse, Ella gave a brief statement to the press, flanked by Brandon and their daughters. The 3 girls held hands, presenting a united front that social media would turn into a symbol of hope, triumphing over greed. "Today isn't just about punishing criminals," Ella said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "It's about affirming that some things, human life, medical progress, basic decency, are more important than profit. My daughters and I survived because one man heard us screaming and decided to help. Brandon Ellis could have walked away, could have let someone else handle it, but he didn't. He taught me that courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about acting despite your fear, because the alternative is unacceptable." Later, at the celebration dinner Hawthorne had organized, Brandon found himself surrounded by people whose lives had been touched by the past months. Detective Mendoza, who'd been promoted to lead a new anti-corruption task force. Colonel Reeves, preparing to retire after ensuring the Protective Services Division was established with clean leadership. And the 40 patients from the Memorial Hospital trial, many already showing signs of remission, all eager to thank the woman who'd given them hope. Patricia, the grandmother who'd been first to receive treatment, approached with tears in her eyes. "Miss White, the doctors say my tumors are shrinking. I might actually get to see my grandson graduate high school." Ella embraced her, both women crying openly. "You're going to see him graduate college, Patricia, and get married, and have grandbabies of his own." Brandon watched from across the room, feeling the weight of the past months finally beginning to lift. They'd survived kidnapping, siege, assassination attempts, and legal warfare. They'd protected innocent people, brought criminals to justice, and somehow built a family from fragments in chaos. Chloe appeared beside him, tugging his sleeve. "Daddy, Agent Hawthorne says you're thinking about taking a new job. Is that true?" Brandon knelt to her level. "Maybe. It would mean helping protect people like Miss Ella and her daughters. People who are trying to make the world better, but need someone to watch their backs. What do you think?" "I think Mommy would say you should do what makes you happy, and I think helping people makes you happy. You're pretty wise for 8 years old." "I know," Chloe said with Sarah's confidence. "I get it from both my parents." Ella joined them, the twins in tow. "So, about this new job opportunity, the Protective Services Division?" "I haven't decided yet," Brandon admitted. "It would mean structure again, protocols, answering to people. I got out of that life for a reason. But this time would be different," Ella said. "You'd be protecting people who need protection, not executing missions you disagree with. And you'd have support, a family waiting for you when you come home. Is that what we are? A family?" Zoe rolled her eyes, with the exasperation only preteens could muster. "Obviously. We've been a family since you saved us. Adults are so slow about these things. We're getting married next month," Lily added matter-of-factly. "Mom and Dad, I mean. We already planned it. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. You're going to say yes when she asks you properly, right?" Brandon looked at Ella, who had the grace to appear embarrassed. They may have gotten ahead of themselves on the timeline, but the sentiment's accurate. "Brandon Ellis, I know we've only known each other a few months. I know this started in crisis and chaos. But I also know that I love you. And I can't imagine facing the future without you. So, when you're ready, if you're ready, I'd very much like to make this official." Around them, the celebration continued, but in their small circle, time seemed to pause. Brandon thought about all the reasons to say no, to slow down, to be cautious. Then he thought about Sarah's advice, to keep living, about the family he and Ella had built, about the look of hope on his daughter's face. "Yes," he said simply, "to all of it, the job, the marriage, the future. Yes." The girls erupted in cheers. Ella kissed him while their daughters danced around them, celebrating a family that had been forged in fire and sealed in love. 6 months later, Brandon stood in the backyard of the house they'd bought together, a sprawling property outside Ashford with enough space for 3 energetic girls and all the security measures his paranoid mind required. He was setting up for Chloe's 9th birthday party, watching as she and the twins decorated with streamers and balloons. Ella emerged from the house carrying a cake, her engagement ring catching the afternoon sunlight. They'd married in a small ceremony 3 months ago, surrounded by the strange extended family they'd accumulated. Federal agents turned friends, rescued patients turned advocates, and enough security personnel to guard a small nation. "The Protective Services Division called," Ella said, setting down the cake. "They want to know if you can consult on a case, a scientist being targeted for her climate research." "What did you tell them?" "That my husband would have to think about it, but I suspected he couldn't resist helping someone in need." Brandon smiled, pulling her close. "You know me too well." I know you're exactly the kind of man who hears someone screaming in the dark and runs toward the danger instead of away from it. It's what I love most about you." The doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of party guests. Patricia and her grandson, now healthy and thriving, Detective Mendoza with her family, Hawthorne, and several members of his team. Even Colonel Reeves, officially retired but unable to miss the celebration. As the party filled with laughter and joy, Brandon found himself reflecting on the strange path that had led him here. A scream in the darkness, a split-second decision to help, and suddenly his entire life had transformed. He'd saved Ella and her daughters that night, but in many ways, they'd saved him too. Saved him from a half-life of going through motions, from the slow death of a man who'd forgotten how to truly live. They'd given him purpose, love, and a future worth fighting for. "Daddy," Chloe called, "come play with us." Brandon joined his 3 daughters, his wife, and the community of people who'd become family through shared danger and deeper love. The soldier had found peace. The protector had found home. And the man who'd heard a scream in the darkness had found everything he didn't know he was missing. It wasn't the ending he'd expected. It was something far better. It was a beginning. 2 years had passed since the night Brandon Ellis heard 3 voices screaming in a shipping container, and life had settled into something that resembled normalcy, though their version of normal would never look quite like everyone else's. The morning started the way most mornings did in the Ellis household, with controlled chaos. Chloe, now 10 years old, was helping Zoe and Lily pack their school bags while debating the scientific accuracy of a movie they'd watched the night before. Ella stood at the kitchen counter, preparing lunches with the efficient precision of someone who'd learned to balance running a pharmaceutical empire with managing 3 energetic daughters. Brandon finished his coffee while reviewing security protocols on his tablet. The Protective Services Division had grown to a team of 47 operatives, all dedicated to protecting people whose only crime was trying to make the world better. In the past 2 years, they'd safeguarded climate scientists, whistleblowers, humanitarian workers, and journalists, all people who'd become targets for doing the right thing. "Dad, can we talk about the science fair project?" Lily asked, appearing at his elbow with a notebook covered in chemical formulas. "I want to demonstrate how Mom's cancer treatment works at the molecular level, but Mrs. Henderson says it might be too advanced for 6th grade. Brandon smiled at his daughter, still marveling at how completely the twins had become his. Not biologically, but in every way that truly mattered. "Maybe we simplify it a bit. Show the concept without getting into graduate-level biochemistry." "But the graduate-level biochemistry is the interesting part," Lily protested, and Brandon exchanged an amused glance with Ella. Their daughter had inherited her mother's brilliant mind and stubborn determination. "How about we make it interactive?" Zoe suggested, joining the conversation. "Like a model that people can manipulate to see how the treatment targets cancer cells. Make it visual instead of just theoretical." The twins had different strengths. Brandon had learned. Lily excelled at theoretical understanding, while Zoe had an intuitive grasp of how to communicate complex ideas simply. Together, they were formidable, and he suspected the world would be hearing a lot from both of them in the years to come. "That's a great compromise," Ella said, ruffling Zoe's hair. "Visual demonstration that shows the science without requiring a PhD to understand it." Chloe looked up from her tablet, where she'd been researching something for her own project. "Dad, there's an article here about Crimson Pharmaceutical. It says some of their former executives are getting early release for good behavior. Does that mean they could come after us again?" The question hung in the air, a reminder that their past wasn't completely buried. Brandon set down his coffee and moved to sit beside his daughter, making sure all 3 girls could see his face. "Here's the truth," he said, choosing honesty over false comfort. "There will always be people who want things they shouldn't have. Power, money, control over others. Some of those people might remember us, might hold grudges, but you know what? We're prepared. We're smart. We're careful. And we're together. That makes us stronger than any threat. Plus, Dad's basically a superhero," Zoe added with the confidence of someone who'd watched her father take down armed kidnappers. "And Mom's a genius. And we're learning self-defense and situational awareness and all the things that keep us safe." It was true. Brandon had been teaching the girls age-appropriate protection skills since the trial ended. Nothing aggressive, just awareness, confidence, and basic defensive techniques. Ella had insisted they balance it with art classes, music lessons, and normal activities. The result was 3 remarkably capable young people who could discuss quantum physics and throw a proper punch in equal measure. "The world has dangerous people in it," Ella said, joining the conversation. "But it also has good people. People like your father, who hear someone in trouble and help instead of looking away. People like Detective Mendoza, Colonel Reeves, and Agent Hawthorne, who risk their careers to do what's right. And people like you 3, the next generation who'll make better choices than we did." The school bus arrived, prompting the usual scramble for forgotten homework and last-minute hugs. Brandon walked the girls to the door, performing the security check that had become second nature, scanning the street, noting the positions of his security team disguised as neighbors, confirming that everything was as it should be. "Love you, Dad," the 3 voices called in chorus as they headed down the driveway. "Love you all," Brandon called back, watching until they were safely on the bus. Ella moved beside him, slipping her hand into his. "You're doing that thing where you analyze every possible threat within a 100-yard radius." "Old habits," Brandon admitted. "Though I notice you're doing the Dashin." "That, same thing. We're quite a pair, aren't we? The paranoid protector and the security-conscious CEO." They moved back inside, and Brandon pulled Ella close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. 2 years of marriage, and he still found himself grateful every morning that she'd chosen him, chosen this life, chosen to build something beautiful from the fragments of trauma. "I got an interesting call yesterday," Ella said. "Memorial Hospital wants to name their new cancer research wing after Patricia. She passed away last week." Brandon felt the familiar grief that came with losing someone they'd fought to save. "I thought she was doing well." She was. Lived 2 years longer than anyone expected. Got to see her grandson graduate and get engaged. She died peacefully, surrounded by family, because our treatment gave her that time. Ella's voice was thick with emotion. "Her daughter called to thank us. Said those extra 2 years were the greatest gift anyone could have given them." It was moments like this that reminded Brandon why he'd taken the job with Protective Services, why he continued to put himself in danger to shield others. Because time mattered, because families mattered, because sometimes the greatest victory wasn't preventing death but giving people the chance to live fully before it came. His secure phone buzzed with a message from Hawthorne. "New case. Potential threat against a human rights attorney in Seattle. Team briefing at 1,400 hours. You have to go," Ella said, reading his expression. "Not immediately. Briefings this afternoon. I have time." They spent the morning doing mundane things that felt precious, because they understood how easily they could be taken away. Brandon worked on the car he was restoring, a classic muscle car that reminded him of his father. Ella reviewed research proposals from her company's new open-source initiative. They had lunch together on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. Comfortable in the sea. Silence between words. "Do you ever regret it?" Ella asked suddenly. "The life we have now, the security measures, the constant vigilance, the fact that our daughters have to know about threat assessments and emergency protocols." Brandon considered the question carefully. "I regret that the world requires vigilance, but I don't regret our family or the choices that brought us here. Do you?" "Not for a second," Ella said firmly. "Yes, our life is complicated. Yes, we have to be more careful than most families. But we're also more aware, more grateful, more intentional about every moment. And our daughters are growing up understanding that doing the right thing sometimes requires courage, but it's always worth it." That evening, after the briefing and dinner and homework help, Brandon found himself in the girls' shared room for their nightly ritual. The three of them had insisted on staying in the same room despite having a house large enough for separate spaces. They claimed it was more fun, but Brandon suspected it was about security in numbers, the comfort of not being alone. "Dad, tell us a story," Chloe requested, the same request she'd made since she was 3 years old. "What kind of story?" "A true one," Zoe said. "About when you saved Mom and us." Brandon settled into the chair between their beds. "You've heard that story 100 times. But it's our story," Lily insisted. "Our family's origin story, like superheroes have. Tell us again." So Brandon told them, editing the violence, but keeping the truth. He told them about hearing screams in the darkness and choosing to help, about finding them in the shipping container and refusing to let criminals win, about the siege at the cabin and the federal trial and the moment when they all chose to become a family. "And the moral of the story," he concluded, "is that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose courage over comfort. You don't need superpowers to make a difference. You just need to care enough to act." "We want to be like you when we grow up," Chloe said sleepily. "Helping people, I mean." "Then you'll make the world better than we found it," Brandon said, kissing each of their foreheads, which is all any parent can hope for. He found Ella waiting in their bedroom, reading case files for her company's latest research initiative. She looked up when he entered, and the smile she gave him still made his heart race. "How'd the story go?" "Same as always. They never get tired of hearing it." "Because it's true," Ella said, setting aside her work. "And because it reminds them that good things can come from terrible situations, that families can be built from choice and courage instead of just biology." Brandon climbed into bed beside his wife, grateful for the ordinary miracle of their life. Outside, security teams maintained their watch. Across the country, people he'd helped protect were living their lives because someone had chosen to defend them. And here, in this house, 3 young girls slept peacefully because they knew they were loved and protected and valued. The world was still dangerous, threats still existed, but tonight, in this moment, Brandon Ellis was surrounded by everything that mattered. A family forged in fire, a purpose that gave meaning to the darkness he'd survived, and a future that stretched ahead with possibility. He'd heard screams in the darkness 2 years ago and run toward danger instead of away from it. That single choice had transformed everything, had given him back the life he'd thought died with Sarah, had shown him that redemption and second chances were real. As Ella curled against him and sleep began to pull him under, Brandon thought about the scientist in Seattle who needed protection, about the girls who would wake up tomorrow ready to learn and grow, about the woman beside him who'd taught him that love could bloom even in the aftermath of trauma. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they were home, they were safe, and they were together. And that, Brandon reflected as sleep finally claimed him, was more than enough. It was everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.